All right. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Field Talks. Field Talks is an online event series aiming to explore and unpack issues relating to sex, relationships, and identity. And Field is a sex-positive dating app open to all genders and sexualities. Fun. This event is an opportunity for Field and everyone else who's tuned in today to hear a group of Black people and people of color talk about their experience on dating apps. We're here, we're interested in exploring our desires and alternative relationships on Field and on other apps. But we have a pretty specific time of it, and even between us, many, many different stories and experiences. So we're going to share some of those with you today. And I do know that Field are particularly interested in getting better at this stuff and really trying to create safer spaces in a meaningful way. So hopefully this will be a cute resource for them as well, to do some learning, do some changing in a long-term, sustainable way, which I know that they are committed to. That's great. So feel comfortable to talk freely. I'm talking to you, the panelists, and we will speak for the next hour. So before we get stuck in, let me introduce you to the people listening. First up, we have Venus Cuffs, who is a BDSM educator, fetish trainer, nightlife personality, and promoter. And I know has done a huge amount of work in New York City in BDSM and sex-positive spaces. We have Tia Simon-Campbell, who is the co-founder of Babes, a queer Black art and DJ collective based in London. They are also a beautiful DJ that I've had the pleasure of experiencing many, many times. And they work across many different sounds and feelings, with like a special nod to Black house music from its origins to its new evolutions. That's Tia. We have Cherie from Black Poly Pride. She co-founded Black Poly Pride and the Polycultural Diversity Alliance, and is devoted to normalizing Black polyamory. Black Poly Pride have done loads of work creating safe spaces that center both polyamory and Blackness. We have Kenny Ethan Jones. Kenny's a model and trans activist focusing on menstruation, body politics, mental health, and intimacy. Some of my favorite things, apart from menstruation maybe, but that's a different talk. And then Tesh. Hi, Tesh. We've got Tesh, who's a regular Field user and is fascinated by how non-conventional relationships and identity intersect with race, which is good because here we are. Right, we can get into it now. That was quite speedy, wasn't it? That was quite good. All right, so I'm thinking we can start at the point where we know we want to get on a dating app. For whatever reason that might be, we have a specific thing in mind, or we're a bit bored and we need some kind of interaction, or we're looking for the love of our life, whatever it is. So what are you thinking about in that moment? Like, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling? What's that bit like for you, choosing a dating app, making your profile? I just wanted to get into that a little bit. I know, Venus, when we spoke about this earlier, you had some interesting thoughts around like mental health and the process of dating apps in general, but particularly that initial bit. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure. I think when I was dating, very like openly, I was making sure that I was on apps where I can meet people that had the same interest as me. I am very much into BDSM and kink, and if I can't have those fulfilled in a relationship, I usually don't want to move forward. But I definitely had concerns joining any app to date because there's like a lot of open racism on the internet, and behind keyboards and a screen, people become very brave. That I'll use that word. Empowered to say some really horrible things, and I have been called the N-word, on dating apps. I have been fetishized on dating apps. And so there's like a whole mental preparation that you have to have, like getting ready as a Black person to be on dating apps, because it reflects the real world. And unfortunately, things that people wouldn't necessarily say to you, they feel more comfortable to say online. So you're just going to get floods and loads of emails and messages like that. So I think like I always had like a lot of anxiety whenever I started a profile on a dating app. Picking the right picture, what do I say, and then on top of that, dealing with like potential racism that I know is going to happen, misogyny that I know is going to happen, and also sometimes homophobia, because when you're a queer person and you put yourself out there as queer, you're going to have like a lot of people that you're not necessarily looking for, that still may message you with their own agendas. So it's a lot. It's a lot to prepare for mentally when you're a person of color trying to date.
Totally. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else want to respond or add to that?
I mean, I'm not as. Oh, hello. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not as cool as, or yeah, definitely not as cool as you guys. But from my experience of trying all the apps in various flavors, I think one thing that I definitely do, which the last couple of months have reflected on a lot, is I pretty much try and whiten up my profile, which is a really sad thing to say. But I think I've noticed in my own app dating history and IRL dating history, the number of people I've met, male or female, that have said, I wouldn't have swiped right on you on an app. And I've always wondered why and how. And I think that there's quite a set expectation of like, I mean, I am an Asian guy that works in tech, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a lot of expectations of what that type of person is. And then actually, I'm into very different types of relationships or different types of sexual acts that may not have been that obvious. And I have to like make a conscious effort of deciding which app I were to join. And then there's another layer on top of that, which is figuring out how to construct a profile, which I think reveals enough of me whilst also appealing to kind of like a quote unquote broad demographic, which is based on a notion of like of Western beauty standards. And that's something I've really seen in all of my apps usage, where I seem to purposely set a profile both in terms of pictures and comments and kind of anecdotes of my life, which I think are very, very tailored to try and come across as not stereotypical, which in comparison to some of my other friends, and I have predominantly kind of white friends, that's not something that ever occurs to them. So I think that I'm not pretending to deal with the same thing that everyone else on this panel does, but just a general kind of interesting point is, I think, as a non-white person in the UK or in the West, and I've used apps in different countries, I feel it's a really hard. It's quite taxing, actually. I get quite tired of using the apps, because I feel like it's a constant battle to almost prove myself within a very westernized sense of what is beautiful or what is expected or what is desired. And that's something which I kind of fall in and out of love with these apps, and I use it for a bit, and I find that I'm not meeting the right types of people, or I'm just not enjoying the experience, and then I just kind of give up. And yeah, it's not quite the same as what Venus was saying, but I think definitely the idea of whiting up my profile or trying to change a lot of how I phrase things and show things to appeal to a Western beauty standard is quite interesting. And I didn't really realize that until the last kind of month or so.
Thank you for sharing that. That's actually got me thinking too, because I've also found dating apps quite exhausting generally, and like don't actually use them very much at all. And I always kind of thought that was just like a personality thing, you know. I was like, that's just like a me thing, you know, like they exhaust me. But of course, everything is racial, everything is political, and it makes a lot of sense that we are all in our own ways engaging in like such intense mental gymnastics all the time, and it is exhausting. So thank you for laying that out a little bit. But anyone else like to share their experience? Yeah.
I think that exhaustion standpoint is very real, especially for me as a person who is Black and polyamorous, because typically if I'm on a dating app, there are two things that I find myself being asked about predominantly, and that is my race or my relationship orientation and love style. So there are people who want me to either teach them about polyamory or to be their experimental, like, first Black lover. And so something that's actually happened over the past month and a half is that I've actually had an influx of like white people liking me on dating apps, and it's made me slightly perplexed, but it goes into that realm of like fetishization, because when, you know, Black Lives Matter is this movement right now, and every single company and organization is doing this push to align with this, and you know the masses pick up on that, and even in dating people want to pick up on that, like being it's like being a commodity. So.
Yeah. It's scary and so hard to navigate, especially when you have relatively little to go on, right? Like you said, people are behind a screen. Like Venus said, they get brave. You know, it's hard to know what you're dealing with, and it is really exhausting and frightening. Okay, so does anyone feel like they might want to share their experiences, kind of being on apps? Maybe some positive experiences, or like some specific times that have been particularly jarring for you. And also we've touched on this already, but like how our intersections feed into this, right? Because we're doing this talk and it's about racism, it's about being Black, being people of color on dating apps, but we're a lot of other things too, right? There's a lot going on there. Kenny, I don't know if you want to share on that. Lovely. Okay,
well,
I know that
it's quite difficult for me because obviously I don't really use dating apps. I had a very short time of experimentation and said this is not the one for me, and that was purely because every time I spoke to somebody, I kind of felt like a personal consultant. It was like, because kind of the awareness around trans people was so low, every time I was talking to someone, it was like, right, so basically I'm your dictionary for explaining what trans is, and then I have to kind of explain to people what their sexual orientation means, and it was just not felt very taxing. So it kind of affects me in that, like, trans people are very fetishized, especially trans women, especially Black trans women. So, I think being a trans man and being very cis-passing, meaning that I can go my day to day not really being noticed as trans, I kind of had an easier time than some trans people who, they're earlier on in their days of transition and they're very visible. But I think trans person, and especially being a Black person trying to navigate that space, it's you're kind of like, you become a teacher to people, and it's like you don't want to take that position when dating someone or trying to get to know somebody, and I also found myself that I was like propping myself up to please other people, and I wasn't kind of saying, what can you bring to me and what will you bring to my life, and that just made me feel really uncomfortable, because I was like, why am I not putting myself first here, or at least equal with these other people that I'm trying to date? So that was, for me, I was like, I don't really like what I'm experiencing here, and I just found it easier to find better connections with people in real life, if I'm honest.
I feel that. Anyone else like using dating apps at the moment? Want to share their experience? Tia, what are you saying?
I was just going to say, I'm not using dating apps at the moment, but my experiences of them have been kind of echoing what everybody said so far. But something that I've really noticed is, I suppose, what you were saying, Tesh, about people presenting a particular version of themselves and whitening up their profiles. It's like it creates this additional layer of colorism, which I found really hard to navigate. Like being a dark skinned person has meant that when I do actually encounter other POC or black people, that has also really fed into the ways that the interactions that I've had. And again, I just find it so tiring. I'll get a dating app. I'll be like, okay, great. I've got the energy for this. A month later, I'll just be like, forget this. I cannot be bothered. I do not have the energy to be schooling people of color, black people and white people. And I feel like a lot of the time it's also trying to navigate queer relationships. It always falls into a friendship zone, because especially in this lockdown period as well, while we're not able to go outside, it's meant that whenever I do meet somebody online, that I'm just like, yo, we need to be mates, because that is that's so much more important to me in this moment, and I feel to everybody that I've been interacting with. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that point about having to educate actually everyone, right? Because sometimes I feel like we make the assumption that if we're speaking with someone or connecting with someone that has some of the same identity markers as us, like that's easy or like that's flawless, but actually every human interaction is taxing in its own way. Important to remember. Anyone feel inspired to share?
I mean, I've dabbled again with the apps in my boredom of trying to get my app started, of my own app started. So I think I was just bored and I needed something to do. But I think my experience recently with lockdown has been the same as what it was before, in that I guess the solace I find in the apps is I just don't get as many likes as other people do, and I don't think I'm unattractive. I think there is a racial element to that, but of the likes I do get, I do think that I tend to find that they're quote unquote high quality, in that I naturally have a smaller pool, and I think I get on with those people better. One thing that I have found really frustrating, actually, and this happened relatively recently, kind of within the last 6 months, was met. So I didn't meet. I matched with someone, and they were very attracted to me because I was of Indian heritage, almost to the point that a bit like what Venus and what Venus was saying before, what T was saying before, what Cherie was saying before about that fetishization, and I kind of said to this person, I was just like, it would be nice to want just to be wanted, not to fulfill some kind of Aladdin fantasy or some kind of very specific racial tick box niche. And I think that, what I think with seeing the app's usage, and I'm not doing them seriously, but with BLM, I have noticed a bit of a shift. But it's not as much of a shift as I had hoped. And I think that there's still quite a lot of a lot of people out there that I think are quite confused at the moment, and I think my experience of using the apps hasn't necessarily changed. I think that they're still quite racially biased, or at least systematically pushing a certain type of desire. And I think that if you don't fit into a very broad set of identity, then it is really taxing. But I guess my one solace, as I say, is that lockdown has meant it's very hard to meet people, so you kind of maybe end up making better connections, richer connections, because people naturally self-select themselves out. But if you're looking to meet a partner or something like that, I still think these apps are flawed, because they're purely based on this veneer of reality that you're supposed to kind of present to the world, that is based on a different version of yourself.
Mm. You got me thinking about something I wanted to ask actually, which is when we are on apps and we are trying to avoid being used, being fetishized, being insulted, all of that. Do we have tests or like tips or hacks that like we've kind of had to develop to navigate those spaces? Like I know that for me, for example, when I've used apps in the past, maybe I'll make sure like the third picture is like shows my full body hair or something like that. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, here I am, and then it's self-selecting in some kind of way. So like maybe I'll get some like fetishy responses to that, or a few like insults, or maybe like just an interest that feels a bit off. But it's just like a way of selecting. Or like maybe once I get talking to someone, I'll make a statement about whiteness that's just quite rude, you know, and they'll either appreciate that or not. So like there's these ways we have of like of having people find their own way out the door, right, before we have to like endure more trauma. I'm just wondering what yours are, or if you do that at all.
I love that, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, yay everyone. Venus, we go Venus first.
Okay. Okay. So like I know we're all from different places in the world. In the United States, ever since Trump got elected, I've noticed people are way more overtly racist online. So like one of the things I used to do before I met my fiance is um, don't message me if you're a Trump supporter. That was like one of the first things that I put out there, and of course I got I got a lot of backlash for that, and I always laughed because it was funny. But it was very telling, because these are the people that were actively looking at my profile, um, and were actively seeking me out and would call me chocolate goddess, cocoa bunny, ebony this and ebony that. Um, they were already ready to fetishize me. Um, and I mean, some of the other things I would do the same thing. I would kind of be rude in some ways, to some white folks that would message me. They would say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And the first thing I would say is, "Who did you vote for?" What are your? Do you believe? And I mean, I've asked questions that like people think are so like, why would you start off a conversation on a dating app that way? Like I would ask like, do you believe that trans women are women? And if I got the wrong answer, I would block them. I just I I think just like dating and trying to find someone that had their beliefs aligned with what I believed, like there was too much of a process a lot of times getting there. So like all the small talk about what kind of movies do you like, and then you find out like 2 months later this person is super homophobic or transphobic or something like that, and it was already like it was traumatizing every single time. So then I just started starting the conversations with those things that bothered me in the past to weed them out pretty quickly. Um, and I think that's what led me to the partner that I have now, just kind of getting all that other stuff out of the way first.
Yeah, hard relate. Penny, were you going to say something?
I yes to all of that. Like, I think it's very very kind of when I did use dating apps, I thought it was very important to kind of say this is this is where my beliefs are and see if they were matched. And it didn't need to be perfect, obviously, depending on what my need was for going onto those dating sites. Obviously, if I was looking for a long term partner, they would need to hit a certain criteria. But if it was just like dating and fun, then there's certain things that I can be like, you don't have to be perfect for. But ultimately, I feel like you need to go in with that headset and that mindset, sorry, and know what is okay, what's your complete yeses and what's your absolute no's. Um, but I tried this like really upfront approach. I basically put in transgender, polyamorous, pansexual, and sexy as fuck as like my bio, and just kind of seeing like what happened and who would approach me. And then I found out that people that kind of like fetishized me would almost all the time bring up the fact that I was trans and automatically want to know more about that and ask me if I had surgery. And that was just a quick block for me. Because I was like, if that's where our conversation is first going and that's the things that you care about, you are not the person I want to be interacting with anyways. So I felt like being really honest with who I was ultimately just brought out the people that I didn't want to be close with. And that just kind of made everything so much easier. And then the problem was, by the time I did that, I didn't find anybody. So I just decided to leave instead.
I think that that's such a great segue into because my tests are a little bit different because I feel like I think it's white people's responsibility to present as safe on dating apps. So I always appreciate when I see a profile that's fuck Trump on it, because it lets me know that you're not a Trump supporter, right? And so I look for those things on people's profiles and in their bios and what they're talking about and what they're presenting about themselves to see if they're presenting themselves as a safe person. And I wish more people would do that. Just present who they are honestly in their bio. If you are looking to date a Black person, a trans person, you're aware of all of how unsafe it is to present in the world as within that demographic. And so if you choose to want to date us, you should present and do that legwork of making it known that you're a safe person.
Do you find that you ever see that? Do people do that?
Yeah, I do. I do see it on dating. I wish I saw it more. And I mean, this is within the last year maybe that I've started seeing profiles where people are saying what their alliances are, their affiliations, putting Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, putting those things in their profiles to let people know where their values and ethics lie.
I've found that that works, but it only goes so far, because some people's allyship is very performative. So I've seen people that will put, fuck Trump, and then they'll still spew out his rhetoric once you start having a conversation with them and call them out maybe for some of their language or some of the ways they speak about other people's bodies and whatnot. So when I see things like that, I like fuck Trump or Trans Lives Matters or Black Lives Matter. I only take it at face value because there's a lot of performative work going on, and it doesn't necessarily mean that a person is really about that life. So I still like to have the conversations that need to be had with them.
Oh yeah. So absolutely, I definitely agree with that. It's just for me, I won't even swipe on a person's profile for the most part if it's if you have pictures with your friends and you don't have a Black friend or you don't have Asian friends, all of your friends look homogenous. How would I know that you're a safe person if you're swiping on me as a Black person, but no one in your life looks like me? There's no various or diverse demographic in your life already. And I know that that sounds messed up. Oh, that person could totally, be a safe person, but how do I know? I wouldn't. And so that's kind of the flaw of dating apps is you just don't know. And it is an unsafe world. You are susceptible to mental and emotional violence on dating apps when you're not careful. And so that's just one of the things to do is kind of the gateway is I see your profile and I'm vetting you as a person I even want to swipe on.
I think just to pick up on Cherie's point, one thing always thought, so I've used, as I said, I've been one of those people that sampled every app. One of the things that I thought was a missed opportunity with something like Hinge was changing the order of how the app is structured so that you actually maybe in the first instance you swipe more on like more of the words, and in those words you could potentially, a missed opportunity is having, especially now, is having a more of an opportunity to present where your allegiances lie, what your value system is, before you even get to like looking at someone. Because when you're on an app, for example, the high chances not many people scroll down to see the words even. But it'd be really interesting to see who you might swipe on if your value systems are matched, rather than just that physical appearance on a, Instagram filter picture which you've copied and pasted into Field or Hinge or Tinder or whatever your flavor is. And I think that that's something, I think we're getting to that at the end of like what Field could do better. But picking up on Cherie's point, Venus's point, again, the onus shouldn't necessarily be on POC people to weed out people or to weed out the other person. It'd be really interesting if an app existed where that value system and those beliefs were presented up front. That I don't know what everyone else thinks, but maybe it's just an awful idea, but it could be quite interesting. And I found Hinge used to be quite useful for that because I could pick up a lot on the person. But actually, that seems to have now died away with Hinge as well.
There's actually an app called Lex, which was based on an Instagram profile called Personals, where there's no image and it's literally you just writing a message about what you're looking for and who you are, and it's for queer, trans, intersex people, and I feel like that's a really interesting way of approaching dating, where it's faceless and it's literally just based on people's words. And I think that that's also a really brilliant way of being able to just weed out the shit, because you're cutting straight to the point of like what your political interests and personal interests are. So I feel like ways of using text more than images is a really good way of like interface for communicating.
Yeah.
So maybe we can move into talking about what we'd like to see, because it seems we're going in that direction, and also, we deserve to make demands as well, not just like to speak on our pain, although that's important as well. But I really appreciate what everyone has said, and like I think it's clear like how many layers of thought and self-protection we have to navigate, like before we've even met anyone, right? And I personally have so much more clarity on why they've never really worked for me, so I appreciate you all for that. And so I'm just going to throw it out there. What would you like to see? Like, do you have ideas about what would make dating experience safer and better for you?
Yes.
Tell me.
Even though I no longer use dating apps, I have like a lot of friends that still use them, and they're still harmed on dating apps a lot. There seems to be no accountability for the types of messages people send to each other. I know there's a way to like report spam accounts, or like I don't know, just certain accounts. I noticed that certain dating apps will block right away. If there was a way that like there's actually some kind of penalty for calling someone the N-word and being able to report actual racism, transphobia, it not only makes the person who has been harmed feel like they're being heard, but it also lets people using the app know that it's not tolerated. And I think as long as we continue to create space for people that cause harm in that kind of way, and there are no like repercussions for any of it, I think people will continue to do it freely.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that actually. I completely think you're right. I think that we need to move to a place where people are being like held accountable for, acts of racism. But essentially, I think it's more about I think we need to get to a point where we're telling people that they're doing wrong. I feel for the most part, if this Black Lives Matter movement has made us realize anything, it's that majority of white people don't actually realize their microaggressions and small acts of racism that they're actually pushing on towards Black people and people of color. So it's starting there. And I think also a lot of people don't come into dating apps with the right idea, or the right mindset towards dating. It's kind of like, oh, I want to find somebody to date. Let me just go on an app, and you kind of like work your way through what you like about somebody. And although I do think it's a process, I think it's also important to kind of like sit down with yourself and kind of write down what you want from a person and what you don't want from a person. But again, that goes back to what we was discussing earlier about values. I think a lot of it's about mindset and kind of, knowing what's right for you.
Sorry, sorry.
No,
I was just
I
going to
think
say, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Tesh, you go
I was
first,
just
and
going to,
then we'll come to Sheree.
sorry, just talking over everyone. That wasn't my intention. Sorry. So I guess this is a slight tangent, but related to what I'd like to see, and it's something I'm actually quite passionate about in my work. And my background, I am a tech founder, and I know a lot of tech founders, and there's two kind of, I guess, requests, and it's kind of on an app related basis, and also on like the kink and swinger scene and in different places. It's essentially transparency. I think one thing I'd be really fascinated by, and it's a tweet I saw gather momentum from a developer friend of mine, who said it'd be fascinating to see how some of these social networks, if they had to publicize how their kind of recommendation algorithm worked, you'd actually see how much of an influence they have on the populace. And if it were like a dating app, it would be really interesting to see how they surface different people to you when you're cycling through. And if that, I presume personally that it's based on some kind of attractiveness quotient. And that attractiveness quotient is probably based on a Western ideal of what beauty is. And from an app perspective, I think it could be a really interesting exercise to kind of publicize how that recommendation mechanism works, because I think you then get to examine how an app can shape your view of what is or isn't attractive. And then going to some of like the more IRL meets I've gone to, or the kink or swinger scene that I've gone to, again, it's just, I've been interacting with a couple of them on Instagram, and I'm like, how many of your kind of organizing committee are POC or are non-binary or whatever? And I think just a bit more transparency about how things work behind the scenes would hopefully give the right types of individuals that Kenny was mentioning enough information to at least start self-critiquing. I guess we can't necessarily force people to be better or worse, but we could look to push for more transparency to give people the right information to critique their decisions, and then hopefully, make their own minds of what is good or bad, but at least it's not clouded in a kind of out there, an unseen mechanism of recommendations.
Sheree?
One thing that I really love that come out of this resurgence of Black Lives Matter is the call for businesses and corporations to be more transparent about who works for them. And I would really love to see dating apps where Black people are developing them, like they're on your board, they're a part of your development team, they're a part of your IT, because I dislike when the only time Black people are represented is when you're marketing to them. Because I think something that we miss is the fact that these apps are businesses. And treating them the way that we treat businesses is important. We need that transparency. We need that call out, because there's no one there in the room who can even start to discuss the needs, what our needs are. right? And so there has to be a person in the room. There has to be people in the room. When you're testing your app, who are you testing your app with? You know, are you coming to us and asking us what our needs are in the developmental phase? You know, when you're getting ready to launch a new version of your app, are you, coming and offering people, hey, can you use our app, for free for X amount of time or whatnot? And tell us what you see, tell us what we're doing right, tell us what needs work. And having a diverse demographic of people that you're testing your product on is always important.
Yeah, thank you both for those points. I feel like we've seen an example of what you're saying recently with Grindr. Kind of, they've got rid of, or have pledged to get rid of, their ethnicity filter, right? So you can't filter by ethnicity, I think, on Grindr, and that's kind of like the idea there has been, in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. It's kind of this weird liberal fantasy where like racism will be solved if people can't filter by ethnicity, whereas I know that the only time dating apps have even like remotely worked for me is when I can make sure that like no cis men, no white people, and no straight people can look at me, so I was like, whose idea was that? Like, how many people sat in a room and decided that was the move for Black liberation? Like, I don't it doesn't make sense. But I wanted to throw that out there. I think we got some questions come in around ethnicity filters. Like, is that a way forward? Do we need like better ones, like, or apps that are just for us? Or what do you think about that?
Do you know what I'm thinking? And it's just come to mind now. I'm thinking kind of like somewhat of a review system, like a starring system of your experience with that person, and that might say your race, because then it could, that will kind of bring out any phobias within that, because you would see it on a starring system. If they're only having good conversations with white people, then it, it might indicate that actually they have a problem with Black people and things like that. That might be a good way around it.
But then it also, I feel like we'll have these systems online, but then does that do anything to actually change people's very racist ways of desiring and loving? Like, all it will do is just make people slightly better at shapeshifting and hiding their ways of being racist. I feel like it's so difficult when everything's online to be able to even start implementing any shifts that actually impact you IRL. So I don't even know how you would start to do that on a dating app if people aren't doing it day to day. Sorry, that was very cynical.
I agree. I agree with that 100%. I agree with that. I mean, that's kind of what I was feeling, just thinking about it. If people are not like practicing these things day to day, it's not going to really change on the dating app. No matter what you kind of implement, it's not going to really do much. I don't know what racism looks like in other countries or other places in the world, but in the US, it's pretty bad. And I cannot imagine somebody opening their phone and changing just because they're on a dating app. I also don't feel that I should have to hide parts of myself just to interact with people. I mean, I don't want to like say race is the same as being fat. It's not. But as someone that is fat, even dating on apps as a fat person is difficult because there is a lot of stuff that comes with that, and me not mentioning that I'm fat anywhere or no filters existing for fat, skinny, body types. I don't think it's going to change some of the fat phobia that I deal with on these apps as well. So I don't think it'll change for race. I think I think the apps themselves need to be very clear about what is tolerated and not tolerated on the apps. And I know there's like microaggressions that we also have to jump over, but if there is a clear message and repercussions for overt racism, we can at least start there. It's a start. It's not the solution, but it is a start, I believe.
I don't think it's
I
realistic for like a
definitely,
dating. Oh, sorry.
no, I was just saying that I definitely think that that's like a start. And I noticed that there are apps where it's completely marketed or geared towards people of color and Black people. And what will happen to me is like there will be a parent company that owns these two apps, right? And the app that is for people of color and Black people will be pretty subpar in in being able, like, its messaging system, like how much like money and effort, like what team is working on developing that app is just always like a subpar experience. um and so I do think it's important to like call that out as well. Like I want to, if need be, limit their people's access to me who are racist. And sometimes that means going on an app where it is specifically geared towards Black people and people of color. And I think that it's important to have those be on par and not be these like subpar experiences in comparison. So where people are putting their money and their effort and, you know, their time is important to me as well when it in regards to dating apps.
Tesh, would you like to add to that?
No, Sherry actually pretty much said what I was about to say. Like, I think I agree with Venus. Like, I don't think it's dating or hookup apps' responsibility to solve racism, but I think it's important that I'm not trying to hark on back to that transparency thing, but I think it really does that's the best you can kind of ask for in the short term, which is not necessarily the right answer. Like, you shouldn't just be going for like the best, or it's like the best worst, or whatever you want to call it. But I think just fundamentally more transparency of the mechanisms of how these apps work and who is creating these apps, right? So like the Grindr example is great, but I mean, if it's just a bunch of the developers that I tend to know making the decision to remove the ethnicity filter, that potentially means that it's either an outsourced team in India doing it, or like a bunch of kind of developers, white developers in San Fran doing it, and that doesn't. Where was the consultation, for want of a better phrase, with the people that would actually be affected or benefited from this? Why is it that something like Field exists and it caters for a very specific niche of dating, but even then, you have further niches here in this like little panel, and those niches are having to go to even different apps that are not as good experiences and don't have as much money behind them, etc. And I think it's that fundamental transparency of the mechanisms of these apps and who funds them and why and what those goals are. I think that is a part of a way of solving at least that question of why things happen, and participants on those apps can hopefully have enough information to start critiquing their decisions on those apps at the very least. And then, yeah, you're right, Venus, you need more policing around it and a bit more of like natural protocol of what is accepted and not accepted, and apps need to be more firm on that. And I think that apps need to be stronger and take a little bit more of a moral stance on things. They can't just sit on the sidelines now. Like, whilst I find it really frustrating that a brand comes out and says BLM, because what does that actually mean? It means very little. It's just lip service. But actually, now that they're doing it, maybe they should actually start having some kind of ethics committee that actually makes an actual decision, that actually does try and put their money where their mouth is, for a better phrase. And I think that's where these specifically, I guess, dating apps could could go. They could choose members of the app community to feed into those ethical decisions of what is good or bad, or what is desired, or what could be improved.
That was great, thank you. I feel like together we've kind of put forward a lot of really useful stuff around, you know, accountability, transparency, and maybe the onus being on these apps who are making money from our desire to feel loved, to educate, you know, and like they're in a really important and powerful position to be able to do that with people who are actually really vulnerable and who are putting themselves out there. Are there any final thoughts, that anything you would like to say or you feel like hasn't been touched on, or a final message for Field and Field's users, and other people, other dating apps? I know Tesh is friend, but any final words for them? No.
I think it's down to like what you said around education. I think many of the users need to educate themselves, and not expect people of color, black people, trans people, marginalized groups to do all the education. So when you come to apps, come with an awareness and a mindset that you're willing to learn, and not just from that person, but rather just to be a better person, really.
Mm.
I think if you can Google where to find an app to have a threesome, you can probably Google to find the answers to why racism might still exist. That's kind of one thing I would say. It's, I think it's great that Field is having this talk, and I'm really like honored that as I said, I'm not as interesting, I don't have as diverse experiences as you guys, and I don't have the same lived experiences as you guys, but I'll share one very interesting anecdote. I was on a night out with a friend of mine in Germany when I used to live there, and I remember distinctly speaking to a group of girls, and one girl said, "Oh, where are you from?" And in Germany, the classic question is always, where are you really from? I said, "Oh, I'm from the UK." He said, "Oh, really?" Because I said, "Well, heritage, I'm from India, fine." I said, "Oh, really? Because you look so European." And I was like, "What?" And essentially, it got into this idea that Western standard of beauty, that I was really good looking because I looked mixed race or not fully Indian. That was a IRL experience that has always stuck to me this day, which has kind of colored that fascination. And I think that, yeah, like I say, if you can Google where to find something like Field, you can probably Google to find why you think certain people are attractive more than others for things that they can't control. And yeah, like I say, you can Google enough to figure out why some people might feel tired or taxed or marginalized. Yeah, if you can find someone to have a threesome or moresome with, you can probably find that question answered somewhere as well for you.
Moresome. That's exciting. So it sounds like the headline is "Destroy White Supremacy," and until then, Black people and people of color in the boardrooms making these decisions and being consultants, at the very least.
I was also going to say, I feel like people really just need to interrogate their desire and decolonize their desire, and that's across the board. That's not just white people, that's all of us, because that really is like, the starting point of why we choose to interact with certain people in certain ways.
I do want to add one thing. Just don't be like, excuse my language, but don't be an asshole to people that are just online looking for the same things you are. If you can't be respectful, maybe just don't say anything. And also stop expecting people from marginalized communities to cater to you, to coddle your feelings. You do not deserve niceness if you can't be respectful. And for people of color and Black people using these apps, if it feels wrong, it is. And if it doesn't feel respectful, it isn't. And don't make space for people that don't respect you.
And I will say too, just to add, I think, for the purposes of this talk, we're talking about Black experiences and the experiences of people of color, and those things aren't the same things. And I think sometimes people of color, people who would fall into that bracket, kind of feel like they can relax a little bit, or like that it's okay because they can kind of, their experiences might be conflated with Black people and they're kind of off the hook in that way because they're not white. And, that's not always the case either. I think everything that we're talking about here that white people do, all people of color do also to Black people. So that's something to bear in mind as well for all of us who are using the apps, and also for apps themselves, to keep that nuance in mind too, because it's not that simple. Anything else? Are we good? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was really lovely to share space with you. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. You can keep a lookout on the Field website for a recap of this event, or head to socials, which are at FieldCo, to continue the conversation. I'm going to be doing a little write-up as well, so that will be up in a couple of weeks. So we'll have some time to let all of these beautiful thoughts, marinate, and then we'll just keep talking about it. And thank you to all of you for all of the work that you do and all of the amazing safe spaces that you create for the people in your areas as well. Because it's huge, especially for a lot of us who haven't been able to find solace or safety online, that there are some places that we can actually physically try and go and get that is incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for moderating.
Yeah,
My
thank you
pleasure.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.